Welcome to Lesson 6. In Lesson 5, you watched Claude Code create a complete feature from scratch. We saw those files being created in the directory that we had set up in our repo. We also saw evidence of a database being created along with some data being placed in that database. There was some evidence that some tests were run to control the flow of Claude Code as it created the files in the database. We did not distinguish between the different tests that were run, but we spoke briefly about them noting all of the tests passed. In this lesson, we're going to examine a little closer 3 of the tests that act as guardrails for Claude Code and its operation. The 3 tests are pytest, Ruff, and MyPy. We will introduce a specific error in our code base that one of our tests should detect and examine whether that test actually recognizes the error and identifies it. We will take one at a time and see if the validation portion of our PIV is real or not. First, we will quickly look at each of these tests, define them, and see what type of errors and problems it should detect. The first test we will present is pytest. Pytest is a testing framework for Python. It actually runs your code with test inputs and verify that it behaves correctly. PyTest's job is to execute tests and report which pass or fail, helping you to catch bugs and regressions automatically. It shines for unit tests, but also scales to integration and end-to-end tests, web apps, and APIs. With PyTest, you typically write test functions like def statements using plain assert statements. Let PyTest auto-discover tests by file name and function name conventions. Run PyTest on the command line, which executes all discovered tests and show detailed failures. Of course, we're going to be running PyTest in Claude Code, and it's going to be probably running it on the command line through Claude Code. Some of the features that make PyTest very popular is reusable setup and teardown code that you interject into tests via function arguments, database connections, temporary directories, or configured clients. You can run the same test function with many inputs and outputs pairs, avoiding duplicated test code. When an assert fails, PyTest rewrite it to show exactly which part differs, giving very readable failure messages. Well, it has a rich plugin system, so you can adapt it to many different testing styles and frameworks. Next, we will look at Ruff and then MyPy. We're going to also look at Ruff, and this is a pictorial view of Ruff. We can see some of the problems that might arise in our code and how Ruff takes care of it. Looking at correctness and bugs, style readability, security rules, maintainability, complexity, modernization, and so on. Ruff is normally very, very fast. You can go through many lines of code very quickly. Look at the formatting and the configuration and customization. We see that in the pyproject.toml file. You can look at that in the code base that we're currently working with. And we'll get to that in just a minute. And the last thing we're going to look at is MyPy. And we see here MyPy, static type checker for Python. And we can see here what MyPy is, how it works, some of the benefits, what MyPy checks, verify function, arguments, and return type, match annotations, track variable types through control flow and flag inconsistent assignments, so on, flag incorrect return types before execution. And some of the examples. See here, passing none of strings where the integer is expected. That's not allowed. Some API problems and violating protocols. We'll see one or two of these things when we go to our code base. So we're going to look at all three of these. Like I said before, we're going to quickly go through some different tests here. We're going to introduce some errors into our repository, and then we're going to check just as a sign that the different tests are working. Of course, we can't try all the different tests that we need to, because there'll be hundreds of things that could go wrong. But we'll take one or two just to show how these problems might be resolved. So we're going to start with MyTest. First, we're going to make sure everything is there's no problems right now. So we'll run all three tests and see what the results are. Let's do that. So we run the guardrails with test, pytest, Ruff, MyTest. Make sure that there's no problems, no errors. And then we'll come back and introduce some errors. Hopefully this won't take too long. The only thing about doing these things like this is that you have some time, you have to wait a little bit okay, not too long. Seems like everything is working, 14 tests passed, all checks, no issues. So now we're going to introduce error for MyTest first. Let's put that in. We're going to take a little, let's see here. Let's see what happens. We're going to introduce error and to see, and it should show us an error message. Okay, we didn't say run MyTest. We're going to have to tell it that. Okay, they went ahead and did it. Of course, these things are pretty smart, so they knew we were going to run the test. PyTest caught the error. You remember before when we ran it, there was no errors. So the error that we introduced. So you can see that these things are working. At least this one is working as we thought it would, at least for this particular error. We can't assume necessarily that it's going to work for every single error, but we have confidence. PyTest is something that's been around a long, long time, so many of the bugs have been worked out. I'm not going to say nothing is 100%, but we can be assured that it's working correctly. So now I'm going to tell the code to correct the error and just to put everything back like it was. So it's going through and doing that. All 14 tests pass again, and we can see it works again. Now we're going to do the same thing for Ruff. We're going to paste in a command to put an import at the top, but then we're not going to put anything in the file itself. So that's a problem, of course. We don't want to do that necessarily. So we do that, and then we have a Ruff check, and we should get an error message. Let's see here. There's an error. We'll caught the error as we thought it would. So again, it's offered to fix it. I'm going to say fix the problem. Actually, offered to fix it. That's what I'm talking about as far as these things can, I think I mentioned a couple of times, these things can run continuously if we have the right setup. Of course, you have to go through and make sure that everything is set up correctly. And the last thing we're going to look at is MyPy. We're going to, again, introduce an error in here. So I said, tell it to change the field from a string to an integer. And then run MyPy. And let's see what happens. So again, okay, wow, found 12 errors. The type check, because we changed the typing. All test case pass string for title. Shows how to catch errors across. I'm going to say fix the problem. Everything goes back. All right, it's doing its thing. What's that? Okay, success. No issues found. It should be winding up here. My bypasses with no issues. Okay. We can see again that all three of these different types of tests pass the, at least the examples that we gave it. Of course, we want to say that you can't really, this is not an indication that it will catch every single error, but just a test to see, okay, do these things work at all? And we can see that they do. We will end lesson 6 here. Hope we have helped you understand the role of pytest, Ruff, and MyPy in providing guardrails around your AI coding assistant and allowing it to run on task, not hallucinate and go off on a tangent. We'll continue our lessons in lesson 7 and we hope you will join us for that. Please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button for us. If you want to continue to follow the series, hit that notification button as well, and you will get a note when the next lesson has been published. Thanks.